on my shirt every single day. So it's a symbol that you might have seen before. We call it our arrowhead. So we're going to start there. The shape of this symbol means that the National Park Service protects all historic and cultural places. So places like the Golden Gate Bridge or the White House where the president lives, or Statue of Liberty in New York Harbor, all of those historical places. But we're also telling stories of people. So we'll explore that a little bit today too. We also protect wildlife species. So here within Wind Cave National Park, we do protect bison. They have been found on the plains. So they're native to this area. Maybe not in California though. So it just depends on the area you're in of what native wildlife species we are going to protect with the National Park Service. The same thing goes with our plant species. So giant sequoia tree is on here to remind the National Park Service employees that we're protecting all plant species. And that's going to change depending on the region and the state that you're in. So here at Wind Cave, we're going to protect a whole lot of different types of grass because that's part of the prairies. It's a very important part of the prairie is that grass. The other aspect is going to be these mountains here. That means that we protect natural scenic areas. So places like Yosemite National Park and Yellowstone National Park were first created because they were unique, their beauty was unique, and they had really cool features. And then down here, kind of hard to see, is a lake. That means we protect all water resources. So we have national lake shores, national seashores, but then within parks, we have ponds and rivers and streams and lakes. We protect all of that. We try to keep it as pristine as possible. Now, while Wind Cave doesn't have a whole lot of water on the surface, we're in a very arid climate. We do have water within the cave. So I'm going to show you on a map where I'm located. That pin drop is where I am in western South Dakota. So when I am looking at and when I'm talking about a region today, this is the region I'm going to be looking at. We call this the Black Hills region. It does cover part of Wyoming, not Nebraska. I included Nebraska in there. But we sit, I'm only about 30 minutes from the Wyoming border as well as the Nebraska border. So we're kind of down there in that corner. So that's the region we're going to be talking about today. And usually when people are coming to this part of the country, they're coming to see these guys. They're coming to see Mount Rushmore National Memorial. Again, that's also protected by the National Park Service. Anytime you see that arrowhead, that means that area is a protected place. What people don't realize is that when they're driving across the prairie, this is Wind Cave, that there's actually this really cool and really big cave below their feet. So this is within Wind Cave. This is an area that visitors can go and see. I'm going to give you an idea. I talked about the region, the Black Hills region. So you can see on my colorful map here, this is what we're looking at. So down at the bottom is where Wind Cave is located. You're going to notice that there's a lot of national park sites on this map. We have Devil's Tower up here. That's actually in Wyoming. We have Badlands. We have Jewel Cave National Monument, Mount Rushmore National Memorial, a lot of national park sites. Doesn't matter the name, whether it's national park, national monument, national lakeshore. If it has that arrowhead, all protected the same way. So a couple of things. Wind Cave is a solution cave. So in different parts of the country and different parts of the world, caves form in different ways. So it could be a lava tube like you have in Northern California. And in Hawaii, they have them. In Idaho, they have lava tubes. You can have an ice cave. You're going to find that in a lot colder regions. You can have sea caves that are found near an ocean. Wind Cave is considered a solution cave. And in order to make it a solution cave, we're going to make a recipe. So we need specific ingredients and specific steps to make this cave. So here's what I'm going to show you. This whole colorful map was once covered in an ancient seabed. And we actually find that within the cave. We have, we find evidence of fossils. So we have these brachiopods, these shell fossils embedded within the rock in the cave. We find corals in the cave, all evidence that there had once been an ocean here. But more than just seeing these sea creatures within the rock is actually how the rock formed. So if I go back to that Black Hills map, the first step in my recipe is that ancient sea. So we need that ancient sea and those creatures because it's going to form our limestone, our first ingredient in our cave formation. So The sea creatures are going to start to die off. They're going to settle on the ocean floor, that sea floor. They're going to start to compound. They're going to layer on top of each other. And as that's happening, the pressure is going to push them down. It's going to be a lot of pressure, forming what is known as limestone. This is what the limestone looks like within Wind Cave. You can see that layering. And then you can also, those brachiopods and some of those corals, you actually see those within the rock, within the cave. So our first step is ancient sea, forming our limestone, our first ingredient in the cave formation. So the next step is going to be what we call uplift. So if you picture a chocolate chip cookie and you want to share it with someone, you're going to break it in half. You're going to try and bend it, right? And it's going to fracture out, and a lot of times it's going to crumble. That's exactly what happened to the Black Hills, but with a lot more force. So there are tectonic forces under the ground that started to shift, and they collided and started pushing upward. We call that uplift. This occurred about 65 million years ago. When that uplift was happening, there were going to be fractures. So we're going to have the highest point of that uplift is going to be about here, okay? The uplift that happened with the fractures, it's going to crack the rock. So very, very powerful forces. Going to crack the rock. Now those cracks or those fractures are going to be the early cave formation. So I'm going to do that again because I want you to notice something. Highest point of the Black Hills, the fracture is going to radiate out. If you were to look at a map of Jewel Cave, their passageways go this way. Look at where they're located down here. When we look at the map of Wind Cave, we're down here. That's the way that our cave passages formed. Let's look at that. So highest point is going to be further north than this, but up here, you can see these cave passageways on this map are primarily going the direction of those radiating fractures. So those fractures, that uplift that happened and fractured the rock, is going to be the second step in our recipe. Very important. But we need another ingredient. After those fractures, we have those cracks that happen in the limestone. You can see the black voids in this cross section. There's going to be something else that needs to happen. So we're a solution cave. So we need water, but not just any water, we need acidic water. So if you've ever had any sort of pop, the bubbly part of pop or soda or Coke, however you call it in your region, anything like that, sparkling water, that has an acid called carbonic acid. And what's actually happening is that as rainwater is hitting the surface this way, there's going to be organic matter. So down leaves, down trees, any animals that have died, and it's going to be picking up carbon dioxide. That water then forms that acidic water known as carbonic acid. As that water is going to seep through the rock, so through this cross section here, it is actually going to sit in those cracks for a very long time. So you're going to see that some of these voids or cracks, they're a little bit bigger. Some of them are a little bit smaller. So what's going to happen when water sits there for a really long time? They're going to expand. So it's not actually expanding, pushing rock out of the way. It's dissolving the rock around that fracture. And so we have the carbonic acid as our second ingredient. So we have limestone, we have carbonic acid. We now are in the third step of our recipe. So we have the ancient sea, the uplift, and now we're going to have the water seeping in. It's our third step in our recipe. And kind of a tricky one, the third ingredient is going to be time. We're talking millions of years the water sat in this spot, dissolving the rock, considered it a dissolution process. So when we're talking about the cave and that dissolution, so we're going to look at how cave explorers go in and map the cave. So because of that solution cave process, this is a very complex 3D maze cave. So to give you an idea of that, this is the largest known opening, 254 miles of passageway. It's about the size of my hat, okay? So very, very small. So when people started crawling into the cave, they had to be really small. and they had to have a lot of perseverance because this is a very challenging environment. So if we were to look at the cave map, 154 miles of passageway is not stretched out over 154 miles. It is actually this square here is just over 1 square mile of surface area. So that prairie, which means that the cave stretches in a 3D way going down. So if you were to interlace your fingers like this, that's how our cave passages sit on top of each other. So the way the water sat for a long time in that cave formation, the taller passageways towards the surface actually, and I'm gonna go off camera here for a minute, I hope. The way the cave passageways actually formed, okay? The longer they sat at the top, nope, I take that back. They trickled through the top, they went deeper into the cave. So this is what, we're gonna highlight it. You're gonna see that there's multiple levels, kind of like a 3-layer cake. If you picture a cake, that's what we're looking at here for the cave passageways. Okay, so the deeper in the cave you got, the bigger the cave passageway. Look at that, I blend in. All right, we're just gonna have to roll with this, guys. I'm now blending into the background, okay? Just the way it goes. So I am gonna, because that's kind of distracting, I'm gonna turn my camera off again, okay?
How deep is like the deepest?
Sure. So the deepest part of the cave is actually going to be down here at our lake. So it's a little deceiving because of the way the map is. So that's about 527 feet below the surface. And that's what they have found so far. And that's important because while the cave creation, you know, the formation, not creation, the formation of the cave is already finished, the exploration and the scientific studies that are going on are not by any means done. So that, you know, that area, I'll show you videos towards the end. That area is very deep, but anytime our cave explorers are going into an area, they are actually going to be, they have to carry all the equipment with them. And so it's actually, because they have to carry it and there's these tight passageways, it makes it very challenging for them to carry any like diving equipment. So while the lakes are really deep, they don't actually know what's under that because they can't really get there, if that makes sense at all.
So there's like underwater lakes, but they can't dive down in because carrying the gear is.
And here's the possibility. I'm going to try this again, see if my webcam wants to work, and I might just not have my green screen. We'll see. Oh, nope, not going to work. Okay, cool. We're just going to keep the green screen. Sorry, guys. I'll do this. I'll make myself really small. All right, so it does, as the passageway stands now, the way that they get there, they can't carry that equipment. But with ongoing research, and there's a lot of filling in of the cave map that's happening right now, like in this area, it's possible that there's another passageway to get them there that might be bigger, and maybe that would change. But part of why the park doesn't really want to allow the equipment is because of the preservation of the cave itself. And so we want to make sure we're not damaging that environment, because we do consider it a wilderness environment. So if we go back to this natural entrance, that really small opening, there were two brothers that were out hunting on a very calm day. And they had actually seen bushes on a hillside that looked like they were blowing in a breeze. And they couldn't figure out why. So they went to investigate, and they encountered this opening. Now we're going to talk about kind of 1880s moving forward from that. They are by no means the only people or the first people to know about it. Many of our indigenous peoples that call this region home have known about Wind Cave for time immemorial, so very, very long time. Their oral histories talk about Wind Cave. We get our name, they consider it the breath of life. And so we get our name because of that wind, the wind going in and the wind coming out, just like it's breathing. So when the brothers started documenting it, telling people in a town. They started documenting it in newspapers. And with that, a family moved into the area. This is Alvin McDonald. And he was 16 years old when he started going within Wind Cave. So when he was going within Wind Cave, he was actually taking detailed notes in his diary, and he was mapping the cave. And so that's very important to us today, to rangers today, because that actually was the kind of precursor to what our job at Wind Cave actually is. So what he was doing was taking people into what we call the model room. This is a route. You'll notice that they probably didn't crawl through that natural opening because the family had actually blasted a larger entrance. So a couple things to notice here in this photo are going to be the way the visitors are dressed. Women are in dresses and stockings and heels, and the men are in suits. When I go in the cave today, and if I'm crawling around, I'm gonna wear clothes I don't care about getting dirty. They can get ripped very easily, and I'm gonna wear really sturdy shoes because it's a very slippery environment. While we consider it a dry cave, there's still water down there. Just like water seeping, kind of like a misty day. So when they're coming to Wind Cave, they're gonna be traveling over with a stagecoach. So you can see here, this is from the town of Hot Springs. The Alvin McDonald family created the wonderful Wind Cave Company. And so they were gonna pick people up in the town of Hot Springs. It's where I live today. It takes me about 20 minutes to get to the cave. It would have taken them about 3.5 hours back in the 1890s. So they're going in it for the long haul. And when they were going in the cave, they were gonna be going for 6 to 8 hours, where we take visitors in the cave today for about an hour or an hour and a half, so not very long. But they needed a place to stay, so they built a hotel. To give you an idea, I showed you that natural entrance to the cave. The largest known opening sits about here. Okay, hotel is up here. The McDonald family lived in this house here. We no longer have the hotel. The visitor center is going to be further about 200 yards down. So if we go in the cave today, we have evidence of the McDonald and Stabler families who were doing exploration within the cave. So I mentioned that many native peoples have known about Wind Cave. Because they view this as their creation, there's not evidence through their oral histories or physical evidence that they had actually gone in the cave. And so while they've known about it, we don't have rock art in the cave or like cave paintings, anything like that. So when the Bingham brothers and then also the McDonald family and Stabler families came into the area, started documenting it in newspapers, that's really going to be the first written documentation that the park can follow back. And then we work with tribes to see their oral histories and how that kind of overlaps. So what you're going to see here is signatures. This is when a route was discovered. I have actually seen this in the cave. You'll notice it's May 6th, 1893. And it says John Stabler and Alvin F. McDonald. Now, if you were to go in the cave and do this today, you'd be in a lot of trouble. But they didn't really know that back then. They didn't know how it was going to harm the cave environment. And so within the history of exploration at Wind Cave, we have learned a lot through scientific study and just observation of what can actually happen. So your hands have oils on them. And if you were to go and rub the cave wall, it's going to damage the rock, which can damage formations. So what kind of formations am I talking about here? I am talking about really cool dripstone. This is known as Fairy Palace because of the dripstone coming out of the ceiling. We have frostwork. So all these formations are different because it's going to depend on the type of mineral that they're being formed with, but also the availability of water. So not seeping or not like a river flowing or a waterfall, but really small amounts of water, like droplets of water. It also depends on airflow. So frostwork, part of why it's a needle-like structure is that it's the amount of water and the amount of airflow. So kind of like an evaporation. Same, popcorn is more of a deposit, so it's going to be a rounded, different mineral. So that's why it's rounded, the structure is different. So when cavers are going into an area, it's important for them to know these different formations because it's going to help them know which layer of the cave they're in. Going to help them know, like these gypsum needles are very delicate. So that means that there's not a whole lot of airflow. It's going to give them a lot of information depending on which formation they are seeing. So when they're going in the cave, they have to be careful because they don't want to like ruin any of these formations, but they're also going to be taking a lot of important data. So anything they want to take to the surface, they're really going to have to take exact measurements, and they're not really taking things out of the cave. So here she has a very fancy headlamp. All the pictures I'm going to be showing you now, the available light is from a headlamp. Okay, there's no developed lights down there. There's no electricity. Cell phones don't work, computers don't work, radar, satellite, nothing like that works down there. So you have to take very detailed data. This is going to be a compass reading. So if you were to look at a map, north, south, east, west, important that they're taking that compass reading so that they can say definitively where on that map this section they're exploring is. This tool down here is called an inclinometer. It's going to be taking the incline of the room, and not seen here is going to be taking measurements from point A to point B so that they know how big the room is. They're also going to sketch that page with the different formations, whether or not there's a lead or an opening they haven't explored yet. So pretty important data that they're trying to take. And for quality control, they are going to have two people taking the same data. So they're going to take the different readings, they're going to swap to make sure that they are exact in their measurements, because all that information then needs to go back to the surface in that sketchbook so that they can fill in this map. So it's a pretty complicated process, pretty time-consuming process, because as of now, and that could change, I had a question of whether or not a drone would work down there. Part of the problem with if we were going to try and put a drone through the cave is that there's some pretty tight passageways. So again, the availability of water and how long it's at in an area dictates how big a passage is. When we're talking about time, it's going to be millions of years. So very small passageways. They're not going to be able to bring any big equipment down with them. So I'm going to show you a couple of videos. You're going to notice that she has a pack on. They're not using ropes, and all that light is coming from a headlamp. So she's taking her time because she needs to be very safe. To get to these areas of the cave, you had asked how, what did I just do? You had asked how long it takes, or like how deep it is. So to give you an idea, these cavers are going to go in with an elevator here, and they're going to crawl for hours one way. So what she's actually doing is going back out of there because they go down to the lakes and then they go back out. The first lake, I'm going to show you a couple of other videos. They're going to be right here. The deepest point is going to be over here. So I keep saying down, and again, it's hard to tell because it looks like a flat map, but it's actually three-dimensional. So if you were to like expand it, that's, again, if you have spaghetti in a bowl and you were to try to expand it, that's kind of what the actual cave passageways look like. So we're going to be looking at a couple of other, let's see here. Now they're going to be going down towards the lakes. You can see the split passageways. All that light is from their headlamps.
A lot of the focus is just early on. It's really cavers doing caving things. Yeah. So person in front probably shouldn't have it. Yeah. Exactly the term.
She's going to make this look really easy. There's water below her. This is actually a very tricky move. So that's all water underneath them. It's very pristine water. So they're going to try very carefully to be atop over top of it and not drop anything in there. The other interesting thing about this cave is that because of the maze-like structure, sound does disappear very, very quickly. So you could be, I've been in the cave crawling and 10 feet away, I can't hear or see the group that I'm with because they had gone underneath where I was. It's pretty scary. So again, important for those cavers to take very detailed information on these sketch pages, because that's going to be the map that they follow to make sure that they don't get lost. Anybody who's ever gone into Wind Cave has come out. There are some people who've gotten lost for a very brief period of time on some of our cave routes because they got separated from the group. But everybody has come out, nothing that's been in there too long. So just like this passageway here, this is one of our most popular routes. So the cave formation, that water sitting there for a really long time. We are still seeing some water seep through the cave, but with it being a solution cave instead of a cave that formed by like a river, like Mammoth Cave in Kentucky, we don't have a whole lot of animal species within the cave. And part of that, a very large part of that, is the available water and food. And this largest natural opening is so small with the wind going in and out of it. We'll occasionally see bats. We have pack rats and very rarely a salamander. And just within about 100 feet of that passage, not very deep into the cave, because there's not an available food source. The water in the lakes is very pristine and considered some of the purest water in the world outside of Antarctica. So the cool part about that is that it's a lot cheaper for scientists to study at Wind Cave than it is to have an expedition to Antarctica. So we see a lot of scientific, we get permits from scientists to study the water and to see what, if they find anything. And so the one thing they're finding are microorganisms, which are so tiny you need a microscope. And they're studying those, but they're brand new to science. So they're pretty excited about that and what that might actually mean. So there's a lot of ongoing research that happens. So while the cave formation has already occurred and we're at 154 miles right now, there's still exploration because it's estimated that at 154 miles, we only have 10% completely mapped. So that could mean that this cave system could be over 1,000 miles in length. And it's going to take people going in there and taking that important data and coming back out and putting it into a computer. Because right now, that's what that process means, is that people are in the cave, in that new area, mapping it. And it's a very time-consuming process. To give you an idea, we have cavers who will go in for an entire weekend, and they might map only 1,000 feet or survey 1,000 feet of new cave passageways because it's such a time-consuming process. So it's important to have dedicated people. It's all happening with volunteers. Rangers aren't doing that work. It's happening with volunteer cavers from around the country. So it's a pretty cool process. I like to hear their stories. I don't personally like to go deeper in the cave. I'll stick with some of the things closer to our lit passageways. So are there any, I think we might be able to do questions here. Are there any questions that you guys might have for me about the cave or about the surface? Anything about the National Park Service? Now would be a good time to ask those questions.
So I'm going to unmute everybody. So if it's too loud, I might have to mute everybody and then see if we can have someone wave their hand or something. Does anyone have a question? No questions? Just speak out a question if you have one.
I'm not seeing any hands. I'll tell you what, if you guys don't have any questions, that's cool. But if something comes up and you're kind of curious, your teacher has my email, so I'm definitely available over email. And I'd encourage all of you, the National Park Service has so many cool resources online and fun activities to do, to definitely explore that.
Oops, I think I just muted, hold on a second. To unmute.
Cool.
Sorry, I muted you for a second.
No worries.
I muted everyone, including you. I guess I'm just fascinated a little bit by that this huge cave system only has one tiny little entrance. So they have not found any other entrances, and are there any that seem to be pretty close to the surface, or?
So I guess I should have told you this part of the program. So we do have an elevator. It was blasted in the 1930s by the Civilian Conservation Corps. The largest natural opening is over here. And the McDonald and Stabler families did blast an entrance, and so we have stairs to go in the cave. So stairs and an elevator to get in there. The other aspect is that over somewhere up here, they call it the snake pit entrance because when they found it, it was like a snake den.
What, snakes?
Yeah. So there's specific times of year that they can go in there and times that they don't. And then we do have a separate cave system. And so this is one of the ongoing research that just happened in December. So we're pretty excited. There's a cave called Persistence Cave within Wind Cave's boundary over here. And they're finding the further they dig, the farther back dating wise, they're finding bones. So they have found like a saber-toothed cat. They have found camels. They're dating further and further back. So 10,000 years ago, 20,000 years ago, we are partnered with the Mammoth site in the town of Hot Springs. So their paleontologist is partnered with our cave scientist. But the cool thing is, so the air exchange is telling us where there might be a natural entrance. And so new exploration is happening in this part of the cave. So they're coming in, they're basically crawling over here. That new exploration has actually found a lot of airflow, which they're excited about. It has also found animal bones. So again, we don't see a lot of animals in the cave because it's just there's not a good food source, there's not a good entrance. And so those bones were actually from a pine marten that we no longer have in the Black Hills, and we haven't for a very long time. They're dated back about 10,000 years. So right now, what they're kind of getting really excited about, and so are all the rangers, is that maybe from this Persistence Cave to Wind Cave, that they might actually have a connection. And so then it would get added to the cave system, the 154 miles. They're also within Persistence over here, finding that there are animals like a pika. Pika is a really small rodent that is very susceptible to climate change because it needs a cold environment, way colder than and higher elevation than this current area is. And so it's giving them a lot of information about what this environment used to look like a very long time ago. So that's all ongoing. So just in December is when they found out the dating. So they got the bone specimens out of the cave in November. December is when they dated it about 10,000 years old.
That's exciting.
So
Laurie, if you're not doing Zoom field trips, are you usually leading people on tours, or?
Right now, so like I'm at home right now, but yes, so we try to do it in the fall and in the spring. We do distance learning. We were doing it before everyone went home. So we've been doing this about 3 years, and we have education rangers, and then in the summer we have tour guides. And so I kind of do all of it. I do the education in-field program. I do the distance learning program. I lead cave tours. So I love that my job is so different. I'm on the planning side for a lot of things. So we're planning new exhibits right now. But that every day I go in and I get, these cool opportunities to go do something different every day, which is pretty neat.
Very good. Again, if anyone has a question, why don't you wave your hand around like crazy, or put your little hand up. We have
JC Warren.
Oh, Jazz, he has. I'm going to unmute him. Okay, Jazz, go ahead with your question, Jazz.
Hi. We were just wondering When you said that it takes them a weekend to go down there, do they stay down there the whole weekend?
So sometimes yes, sometimes no. The part of the cave is all the way down here. It's the only base camp so far, and that's a minimum 4-day trip. It takes them, and we're talking like, I don't know how to, if you picture like a marathon runner and how easy it is for a marathon runner to run 26 miles, right? Because they've trained and they've practiced. These are cavers who are really good at what they do. It can take them 12 hours to crawl one way to get down there. So then they have 2 days to explore and then 1 day to crawl out. So down there, they've set up a base camp. So they have like Tyvek suits to keep the cave pristine. They have water collection. So they are going to filter the water to drink it that's seeping through the cave. But normally, there are a lot of cavers that will come in for a weekend. They will cave for 12 to 16 hours one day. They'll cave for 12 to 16 hours the next day. So part of what's so time consuming and what we're seeing in this area over here is that you need to figure it's going to take them at least 3 hours to start to get to new cave or unmapped cave. And then they explore. And then they have the 3 hours out. Very important to be out on time. We call that our surface watch. If you are not out on time, we are going to start rolling the ball to get you rescued. And so it's something that they have to take very seriously because it's a lot of personnel to get you out if something happens. It takes a long time.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Is it very common that cavers get injured and have to be, sort of rescued out, or has that been, they're pretty careful?
You would think. There is a very lengthy process to be kind of given the go-ahead that you can go cave. Cavers are not allowed to ever go in alone. It's so unsafe. You have to go with a minimum of 4 people. So that's a caving group. And the reason for that is if something happened to someone, you have one person stay with the injured party and then 2 people go out. Because if you only had one person go out 3 hours, what if something happened to them? So they have to get checked off or checked out by our cave scientist so that they understand caving safety, which is very serious. They understand wind caves specifically and how complex it is. So there's a lot of things that cavers have to have before they kind of get the go ahead to go in. And they take that very seriously because it can be very dangerous. And if they're deeper in the cave, we're talking to kind of give you an idea. If we have a visitor that gets hurt, and it happens, on this passage, it's less than a half mile. It can take us more than 2 hours to get them out from here. Wow. So if you're talking about an environment that doesn't have pavement, doesn't have lights, you have to crawl and be carrying that person out at the same time. They do a lot of mock rescues. So this is something that's taken very seriously, and the rules are enforced for the safety of everybody. So it hasn't, in my time here and in recent history, I don't think they've had to rescue anybody.
Does anyone else have a question? Rhea, is that your hand? Nod your head if your hand's up, Rhea. I'm going to unmute Rhea.
How many times have you been in there?
Oh boy, I've worked here for about 3 years. I'm coming up on 3 years. Crawling wise, I've probably been in there about 30 to 40 times. Cave tour wise, 300. I go in there quite a bit. Right now, we don't actually have access to it because our elevators have been down for almost a year, but normally I'm going in there quite a bit.
Okay, do we have time for another question? Sure. I see Hunter's waving his hand all about. Hunter, I'm going to unmute you. What's your question, Hunter?
How can people not hear the people being under them?
Cool question. So because of how complex the cave is, and passages are sitting over top of each other, sound gets absorbed in the rock, and partially, and I don't even think I showed you guys this formation. It's because of this formation. This is called boxwork. It acts kind of like soundproofing, and so when I was yelling, they eventually heard me. but you don't really, sound is weird down there. You can go through an area, and even with a big group, it just gets muffled because it gets absorbed into the rock. To give you an idea, if there was ever, we've had cavers, this is a very stable area now after that uplift occurred. So if there's like an earthquake, it sounds like thunder in the cave. You don't actually feel it. You're hearing the vibration go through the rock. So if that's a much larger scale. So sound just gets absorbed, but it's a bizarre, it's hard to explain. It's a bizarre feeling when, because the cave is very dark. And so you have your headlamp and you're with a group of people. At that point I was with 6 people. So 2 people were behind me and 3 people were in front of me, and they dropped down through this hole, the direction we were going. I didn't know where we were going. And all of a sudden their lights disappeared and I couldn't hear them. So yeah, it's bizarre. It's just the way that the cave passageways kind of sit on top of each other. That was a fun question.
Yeah, you know, we have a kind of famous cave not too far from us, Oregon caves.
Oh yeah.
There's the Lava Lands, kind of over by Klamath Falls and Tule Lake. The Lava Lands, what is it? National Park, Lava.
National Monument, I think. I just had a friend who
So I
moved.
was just wondering, how about have any of my students been, let's just say, in a cave before, like a, not just a little tiny cave, but like a real cave? Give me a thumbs up or wave your hand if you've been in a cave. Some of you, no? Okay, couple. I see Chaz, Evan. All right, let's put our hands down, and then let's see if, wave your hand around a lot if you've got one more question. Maybe we have time for one more.
Sure.
I better wrap it up.
Jensen?
Jensen? Okay, I'm gonna unmute Jensen. There's Jensen. Jensen, go ahead.
What if the rocks fall down and then you're stuck in there?
That's a good question. So I know we talked about that uplift that happened 65 million years ago because of the tectonic forces, but it's actually considered a very safe spot. So if we see a rock fall, it's because of the freezing and thawing, because we get very cold here. We can get to -30 in the dead of winter, very cold. So they try to protect the cave so that the only airflow that they're seeing and that freezing and thawing is going to be at the natural entrance. And there has not been, and it was a minor rock fall, I want to say in the 70s or 80s, 1970s or 80s. But once they took care of the fact that there was too much air getting in unnaturally, that kind of went away. So we have not seen that. It's structurally, what we call structurally sound. So it's pretty safe environment. If we ever have a tornado warning, everybody has to stay in the cave if they're in there because it's the safest place to be. We get some pretty wicked thunderstorms. Thunder and lightning can come up on the prairie really fast and it can be very dangerous. So same thing, safest place is in the cave. So if we have visitors and rangers down there, we tell them to stay down there. Good question.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Lori. It was really fun getting to hear you and about the cave. Ray has got, Ray has got one more question. Ray, one more question.
Have you ever gotten hurt in the cave?
I did, not like seriously hurt. I was leading a group of 10 people. We were crawling through passageways and I had slipped and I hit my arm. So I had a pretty nice bruise on my arm and it was sore. But I didn't need to go to a doctor or anything like that. It was just that I was a little sore for a few days. That was a good question. I want to thank you guys for your patience. I know my technology over here doesn't always cooperate all the time, as you see. But this was a lot of fun getting to see you guys. I hope you all have a wonderful summer, and keep in mind that the National Park Service, the website has fun activities and you can watch videos and explore other places just from being home. And we do our distance learning program, Wing Cave does. There's other national parks that do. So definitely encourage you to check out those resources that you have, okay?
Okay, so I'm gonna unmute everybody and everybody can say a thank you and a goodbye and then we'll sign off, all right?
Awesome. Thank you. Bye. Bye, guys. Have a good day.
All right, thanks again, Lori. Right.
Yeah.
Goodbye, 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 and goodbye.
Bye.
all I could say. Goodbye.
Goodbye. All right, I'm gonna end this meeting, and we'll catch all you guys later. Okay? Thanks so much. Hope you learned something new. It makes me want to go to South Dakota and visit the cave.
No.
No.
It's quarantine though.
Well, yeah, there is that, but sometime when it's time to go again.
Yo.
All right. Well, did anyone have any quick little question or comment before we sign off?
No.
No? All right.
No.
Well, I hope you found that interesting. I was kind of hoping that maybe it would be more of like she could actually go in the cave and do some video, but maybe that
I'm gonna sign off right now.
wasn't possible before, so it's still really interesting to see all that. All right. Bye, guys.
Bye.
Have a good day.
Guinea pig.